It's thinking. There we go. We're live. Although you and I have been talking already, Jason. But this is for everyone who might watch this later or is watching now. This is what Jason Clark and I have been calling top level domain, which is different explorations in different fields of psychology and philosophy. And we'll probably enter into a lot of other realms, but and how they all fit together with theology. The top level domain kind of comes from the creation of the internet. It's that little, those three letters after the .com, .net, .org. And it just symbolizes what is the highest level of organization. And theology used to be the kind of the queen of the sciences, but now it's been dethroned after the Enlightenment. But, we want to, as pastor theologians, we're investigating these things. And Jason and I thought we would just kind of broadcast these in case anyone else found it interesting. We got multiple windows open. Or was that me?
That was me. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. That's okay. That's okay.
Just pressing buttons and it didn't make anything any better. I'm sorry.
Yeah. That's okay. Well, we're talking about...
I've only had like 50,000 hours of practice in the last year to do
on
this
Zoom.
stuff.
Yeah, you should be an expert.
Everything. Yeah. And you're still like, how could I get that wrong?
You're ready to join the Beatles and to storm the, the British takeover of America because of your Zoom competencies.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, so last time we talked about a month and a half ago, we were going through a new unified theory of psychology by Gregg Henriques, and who's a psychologist who has kind of like, he's working on a theory of everything. Like you and I just found his website. We've been looking into the stuff he's working on. He's expanded from a unified theory of psychology to really a theory of everything. A theory of knowledge is what he's working toward, which is pretty interesting.
Everything. I mean, that's just a subset of 8 things with psychology and then the psychoanalytic, isn't it? But
he's creating like
he's got a theory of everything for everything,
a whole cosmology, and he's kind of stepped into that space like after modernity kind of took the world by storm, 20, 40 years ago. The kind of the hubris or ambition to have a theory of everything has faded, and now we just have fragments and communities and competing narratives and stories and things like that. And I think even theology and the practice of pastoring has followed that a little bit. That, we shouldn't say too much. We should be a little more chastened and things like that. So it's interesting that he is kind of offering this theory of everything, but he is trying to, I think, do it in a way that is very situationally kind of or contextually aware and certainly scientifically informed.
I mean, I find it interesting. He talks about great meta crises that we're facing at the minute. Certainly, it's a 20-year project for him, isn't it, or more? And he's definitely trying to address some of the crises at the minute: environmental crisis, mental health crisis, global digital, identity crisis and stuff. And maybe after the postmodern turn, coming up with, like you say, an integrated theory of how all these things can go together is pretty ambitious.
Right. Yeah. And it's pretty interesting. It's been really helpful. You proposed this book for our little private reading group that involves 2 plus, other, maybe other people someday. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And so it's been super fruitful for me. Are you regretting the choice, or are you glad that we kind of went down this rabbit hole?
No, not at all. I picked up his book, an obscure reference from somewhere, and he seems to be getting a lot of traction more recently, since 6 months ago when I got the book, and he's got a new website, and he's popping up in different places. But I found him of particular interest because of the whole point of this conversation. How does the cognitive neuroscience integrate with faith and theology? And his book, I'll be honest with you, there's a lot that's very incredibly technical in it for disciplines that I just wouldn't have the time to know whether he was correct or not. But at a meta level and methodologically, he's incredibly helpful with the theme of psychology, to map out what goes on between neuroscience and the behavioral, which gets us in the door to start having conversations methodologically. In other words, how can theology and faith work with neuroscience and behavioral science. So I think he's key for at least a method for conversations that we can have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think you and
Yeah.
I, we're doctors, right? But the
Yeah.
neuroscience, cognitive sciences, so we're kind of getting up to speed, and um, and he's kind of writing this huge meta description of all these different
Mm.
fields, and the huge description I find helpful, but I think sometimes the details, from other places I've read, I was like, well, I don't know, I'm sure that's a contested point more than he's letting know.
Yeah.
Like he's pressing that point of view a little more than maybe other people would agree. So I think you and I know enough to be able to say, well, that's not the definitive statement on this topic, but it's an interesting way of organizing the information.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, again, at that top level for our discussion here, I think is most helpful for starting to look at how, and he highlights this through psychology, the lack of integration and separation between cognitive science, social science, and then culture, humanities. Now, you and I, from my PhD, use basically political theology. So, getting social science and theology to work together takes a bit of work and has its own controversies. And, that was a big piece of what I was doing. But for me, it's the pastoral, the epiphenomena of everyday life, which is the behavioral and the cognitive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a bridge too far. I couldn't possibly put that into. But for me, that was like a missing piece. When you're doing something on worship or formation, which I was doing with political theology, social science is important. Social theory is important. Theology is important. But how people's minds work and how they think, you start talking about desire and love. Well, there's a whole load of biological mechanisms and cognitive mechanisms for that. So I sort of feel like I've got two pieces when I'm reading his book and trying to plug this third one in. He's helpful for that. What about you from your research?
Well, yeah, it's very similar in the sense that I've been reading things and I keep thinking, well, it feels like this conversation is switching levels, or we're confusing levels of experience or levels of domain.
Mm.
And that the reading I'd done on emotions and things like that, people were kind of talking past each other as far as, do animals have emotions? Do animals feel the same way we do? And people are meaning different things. How
Yeah.
does self-consciousness and then the cultural conditioning or the social creation of emotions, how does that fit into this? So I was reading through these things, and even emotional theorists have changed their mind on how to like group these things. And then I read Henrique's kind of schema, and it really kind of put language to that. And so I thought that was really helpful, which we're going to get to in just a second. Well,
Awesome.
so should we go down the complexity and emergence rabbit
Yeah.
hole? Or
Let's do it.
all right, because I remember
The tree of knowledge.
that probably in early 2000s, Nancy Murphy and a couple other kind of, they kind of introduced me to this language of complexity, of non-reducible, components, that the whole really is larger than the sum of its parts, and that complex systems kind of create other non-reducible kind of experiences and things.
Right.
So he's really trading on that kind of language and that kind of experience between different levels of domain. But was there something about like complexity or emergence that stood out for you back in the day, when you were learning about it, or that you've been holding on to?
Yeah, 20 years ago, in the whirlwind that all those conversations were. I mean, that was exciting. Yeah, with Nancy Murphy in the room. And what was her book? Beyond foundationalism and liberalism, wasn't it?
I think it's fundamentalism. Yeah.
Fundamentalism and liberalism. Yeah, was great. Yeah, I mean, it's lost in the midst of time. I remember the linguistic turn that she highlighted, and trying to 20 years ago understand the nature of language and its representation. So I suppose for me, if this is what you're talking about here, the Wittgensteinian turn here of language games, how language works, what game are you playing, is really important to know, to be able to talk to one another, and how language works. So yeah, that time 20 years ago with all the emerging church stuff was a maelstrom of complexity, emergence theory, linguistics, and meaning. What about you?
Well, yeah, it coming out of studying philosophy kind of in the 90s and philosophy of mind, and especially encountering people like
Yeah, you did all that, didn't you? Yeah.
people like Daniel Dennett and others would usually have a very reductive sense of the
See, I've
mind.
not read any of those.
Well,
Nothing.
no,
So,
yeah, but the language of
yeah.
emergence and complexity helped me get around some of those problems because a lot of people see all of life or consciousness on a single continuum
Right.
that just has
Mm.
kind of time and chaos as variables. And so
Yeah.
Henriques he takes that, but he adds levels of complexity, which I think is really important. So let's just jump in. I just wanted to throw that out there because it's kind of helps solve. But I have this picture here that's
Hey, we're getting the tree of knowledge. Here
oh
it
yeah,
comes.
the tree of knowledge. Let me get rid
There
of
we
some of
go.
this stuff out of the way
Mm.
here. So this is the tree of knowledge. And so the Big Bang is way up here in corner. I don't know if you can see my cursor. You probably can't. So,
Yeah, I can see it's come out well. Yeah.
so the tree, all the way back, you
Yeah.
have matter, which is the lowest level. It's the gray one. And then later
Mhm.
in time, you get the emergence of life, which is that another like flowering tree on top of it. And that is covered by the domain of like biology. So physics is the study of just matter. So that's that first kind of level. But then you kind of have this
Yeah.
language game,
Yep.
transformation, as we would call it. But this level of emergence, that somehow in some way you have life
Mm.
that emerges out of random chance and matter. And that has like
And
genetics.
consciousness for some reason.
Well, consciousness comes later. So that's the red one. The red flowering one
Oh,
is
yeah.
the
Is the mind.
development of
Yeah.
mind. And
Yeah.
that's connected with the development of the nervous
Mhm.
systems.
Yeah.
And that's covered by the field of psychology. And
Mhm.
then another kind of flowering
Yeah.
is the top, which is
Mhm.
culture, or what we would call human consciousness, self-consciousness. And that's studied
Mm.
by the social sciences.
Yeah.
And he talks about, and this isn't on the picture here, but he talks about
Mhm.
different information that's processed. So at the
Yeah.
level of matter, the gray one,
Mhm.
is atomic energy and causal explanations. At the green level is genetic information. Then at the
Mhm.
red level of mind, that's the neuronal, which is the whole like nervous system, not just the brain.
Yeah.
And then at the blue level is cultural or is symbolic. So that's
Mhm.
language, as you were talking about language games.
Yeah.
And so there's these four
Meta
language
meaning. Yeah.
games, as we would call it.
Mm.
But for him, they all kind of merge. It's kind of
Yeah.
the question of emergence and complexity and these types of things. But they're non-reducible. And so we shouldn't
Mm.
reduce a higher level into the causal or
Yep.
information processing of the lower level. And so that's his
Yep.
main thing. And he says that this was the
Mhm.
main insight for me,
Mm.
was that psychology, the problem of psychology is that it
Mhm.
spreads as a discipline, the
Mm.
blue cultural social science
Mm.
level
Yeah.
and the red level, the mind
Mm.
kind of behavior of animals level. And
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
psychology doesn't always name which level that it's investigating or what its
Mm.
results are meant to do or how it's functioning. And I think that's very true for theology too, is that we kind of
Mhm.
split those levels between thinking of creation and nature.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
we split the levels between, social sciences, human sciences, but then even kind of the spiritual level. What is a
Mm.
spiritual level, which would be missing from this, so maybe we can add it or
Yeah, because I mean,
augment it.
he's got a not just a cosmology there. There's a cosmogony, which we could think through theologically.
What's a
But I mean,
cosmogony? What's that mean?
well, that would be the philosophical, metaphysical understandings of this cosmology. So some of the things I found interesting about this is, I mean, his matter, life, mind, culture. He starts from a metaphysical end, which is interesting. Which it still seems to be from reading him online. Scientists just don't want to go there, and he's obviously frustrated. But these concepts of culture, mind, life, and matter are metaphysical, which he maps. This is his ontic that he's mapping against epistemologies present in all of these social science, psychology, biology, and physical sciences. And then obviously this has emerged for him as one aspect of four things, isn't it? With his unified theory of psychology. That psychology has just differentiated and splintered. On the one hand, there's the extreme empiricism of just studying things empirically, human behavior, or the mind, mapping it in an MRI machine or something. And then at the other end is the pure Jungian, Freudian, subconscious making of meaning. And in the middle is the biological. And he does make clear that the biggest gap as domains of knowledge between those schemas there is once we get beyond biology. Physical science, yes, we can figure that out, progressing into biology, but this place and space and psychology just does sit wonderfully there. I mean, I think a lot of people know that. What is psychology? Well, on the one hand, you're maybe taking pharmaceuticals to help you. You may be seeing a therapist. You may be talking about your dreams, or you may be having, put your head put in an MRI machine. Or part of a study where people are studying your behaviors, or looking at your genetic dispositions and stuff. If anyone's seen a psychiatrist, so it's this wonderful world that he's mapped out from psychology in that way. A lot of big presumptions there that were just beyond beyond me. I mean, I think it sort of follows, doesn't it? Of course, if you assume this cosmology, Big Bang, matter, from matter is life, from life, the neurological emerges, and the mind and consciousness, and then societies. We can see that in terms of history, and he's at great pains to make sure that this integrates with notions like big history, multidisciplinary understandings of history, which immediately lend to some critiques. Like, where are human beings in this? Are they decentered? Are they at the center of this? I mean, those, you start to ask theological questions, let alone where is God in this system and structure. But I think that was my run at it in terms of why it's interesting.
Well, I felt the same way, that this is a great description of where we're at. I think his kind of evolutionary psychological developmental perspective has a lot of leaps and gaps in it, so as far as like, how do we move from the gray level of matter to the green level of life? That is it's not a jump on a continuum. It's really a qualitative transition. And I found that it felt like Henriques, as well as other kind of natural philosophers, as I think is proper to call them, they make complexity feels like the notion of complexity feels like the notion of mystery that theologians use. Is at some point you can't quite explain how it is that the Trinity is three persons and one God, or how is it that we have free will and God is sovereign? Well, it's a mystery. Or what is the union, the perfect union of fully God and fully? Well, it's a mystery. So you can kind of explain it for a while. I feel like complexity works the same way too. It's like, well, once you have enough complexity, then you just get life. Like you went from just having chemicals, molecules, and causal explanations to genetic code and things like that. It's like, well, and at the end of the day, they say it, they even say it's a spark of life. It's a miracle. It's unfathomable. It's like, yeah, I know. That's what us theologians say.
You're right. And maybe that's, looking at the diagram there again, he's got this, he's trying to run metaphysical and empirical and show their inherence together. And often that's not the case within they say, I have a particular disciplinary methodological understanding. Your hardcore empirical scientist is going to go, what's metaphysics got to do with anything? Nothing. But at a popular level, I think, when we talked about this in the first podcast, I mean, some of the people doing the most interesting work, Jonathan Haidt, Steven Pinker, Jordan Peterson, they are working in these worlds of bridging the metaphysical and the empirical between neuroscience, consciousness, and behavior. And it's just another way to find a way into it, to look at it, and then think theologically about those things, rather than just trying to mash. Because again, you could just try and mash all these things up together. So it makes more sense to you, for me, to use something that someone else has done to try and run these methods and say, at that level, how do metaphysics and empiricism, how do they come together and feature together for these domains? That's really helpful to then start to talk about things theologically, especially when we're trying to bring those things together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing, and we might have talked about this last time, the thing that is, oh no, we talked about this offline a couple of weeks ago, is that the thing that's missing is kind of like the downward pressure, is that, he has this flowering of these multiple trees nested within each other, but it does feel like that there's also a downward causal pressure that culture does shape our minds, and I think there's a lot of research that shows that your cultural situation does physically change your mind, and that your mind can change your biology, epigenetics, and things like that. And so how is it that we can make sense of those things, that we have a two-way causation rather than just a one-way? It's not just that things are emerging upwards, it's actually that we're having a downward. So like the placebo effect is that you literally, your mind can affect matter. So how do we explain that?
And it feels
it's a miracle.
It's too neat and tidy, isn't it? It's and again, I don't know enough methodologically within the disciplines to critique him, but it's very neat and tidy. Whereas, lived life is not like that. And then, as we know, everyone within their own discipline is going to argue for primacy, of it. A sociologist is going to say, well, it really doesn't matter if there was a Big Bang or not. Or an anthropologist, this is just what people do.
Right.
The social theorist is going to come up with amazing theories for what happened and could happen, but then still scratch their heads and go, why do people behave the way they are? And then that's when the biologist goes, because we're just animals, and really this is why we behave this way. So there's always and then if you're the theologian, of course we're looking at that and going, well, where is God here? Where is the resurrection here? Where is creation ex nihilo? Where are all those factors? Where does revelation come into this and the supernatural? And we would argue for some primacy of those to be integrated into this. So, but this definitely feels hardcore materialist cosmology. That's for sure.
Right.
But I'd love to get him in conversation with Jordan Peterson.
Oh yeah, that would be
just as someone who's psychologically trained and an understanding of metaphysics would be interesting.
So then, should we bring God into all this then?
Yeah, why not?
So, what would that look like then? If we're looking at this and we're saying, well, where's God? So if we just kind of took the last iteration with the four stacked on top of each other,
the timeline's wrong, isn't it?
Well, oh yeah, because we all know that there's only 7,000 years that should be on there. But if we just took this as a description of kind of current, we'll just be anthropocentric, current human experience, and that it's helpful to have a non-reductive, integrated perspective between culture, mind, life, and matter. And that those are kind of maybe helpful, descriptive kind of coat hangers to put our coats on, depending on what books we're reading or what kind of problem we're facing pastorally. Where would God be at on this? Is God at the top? Is God all throughout? Both? Neither?
Well, at best, it's going to be deistic, isn't it? God is not anywhere in this. He's
but
outside.
If we were going to appropriate it for our own theological purposes,
So, well, what are the limitations of it, and what are some of the ways to use it? I say, for me, the place this is least helpful. Maybe I'll start there. Say, if you believe in creation ex nihilo, in a pre-material reality, where it's God that brings the universe into creation. He has human beings in mind. For us, where did mind exist? If we talk about you mentioned the Imago Dei before we came here today. Man emerges very late in this scheme as still an accidental process. So that bit's probably the least helpful. The most helpful bit, again, for me, is the bridge between mind and life, in that space, the psychological and the biological, because that's the place where faith formation takes place. So if we're talking about, worship and what we love and what we think and how we pray and how we do life. Though this is the most fertile place for the individual and formation, and I think that's where he's incredibly helpful to say, why would I bother, reading books on neuroscience to understand what happens in Christian meditation? I think he speaks into that place more helpfully than the cosmological.
Yeah,
What about
for
you?
sure. Well, I really like, I want to Christianize this in some fashion. And maybe other people have done the similar thing. But so this idea of energy and information I find really interesting. And this goes back
Okay.
to like relational neuroscience and Daniel Siegel.
Mm-hmm.
He talks, about how our cognitive and emotional systems is just a processing of energy and information in our bodies, metabolically, but also socially and things like that. And so if I look at this, in a more complete kind of picture, I couldn't find the diagram where he kind of has all these different things. But at the lower level, the quantum level, you have an input
Mm-hmm.
of energy and information at the atomic level, and then
Yeah.
life is a genetic kind of information that is processing, metabolizing, energy resources that it finds in the environment, so it
Mm-hmm.
can continue on in life.
Mm-hmm.
And then the mind this is an interesting one, is that it's the neurons in your
Mm-hmm.
nervous system
Yeah.
that's processing information from the outside environment so that you can optimize your behavior, so that
Mm.
you can find the resources for life, down in the lower region. And so
Yeah.
there's a connection between the two. And then the cultural resources and energy and information is through language, through social
Yeah.
contact, these type of things. And so I was thinking while reading that, is that the input, as
I
you
mean, those
said,
are the other key things he runs. I mean, what did we talk? I can't remember what we talked about last time.
we talked about the behavioral investment
Yeah,
theory,
and
which he
then we got
calls that.
justification. Yeah, you have to have the other three modules to plug in with the tree of knowledge for this to
Well, right.
work.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's the whole book. So this diagram kind of covers the whole
Yeah.
book, but between the red and the green is what he calls
Mm.
the behavioral investment theory, and he calls that the
Yeah.
pivot between these two domains.
Yeah.
And then he calls between the blue and the red the justification
Yeah.
hypothesis, and this is the idea that reason, self-consciousness, and awareness springs from needing to justify behavior to people who have divergent
Mm-hmm.
understandings of what
Yeah.
the next right thing to do is, and so you have to
Yeah.
talk about it, and you have to give and receive reasons and kind of coordinate
Yeah.
your behavior accordingly.
Mm.
That's his theory, right? uh,
Yeah.
so as I was reading this and other kind of neuroscience things, I was thinking, well, is there an input of energy and information beyond these four domains that we're given? And as
Right.
someone who believes in whatever we might call it, a spiritual realm,
Yeah.
God, all these types of things, I would say yes, is actually
Mm.
God in some fashion is inputting energy and information kind of on all three levels.
Mm-hmm.
But if we just
Right.
stuck with mind and culture,
Mm.
revelation, or however you want to speak of God showing up,
Mm-hmm.
revealing, the 10 commandments, however you want to talk about that, or even showing up in person, like
Yeah.
Jesus in the flesh. He's
Yeah.
giving us information about who God is, but he's also kind of energizing kind of the world with the power of the spirit, however you want to talk about that. And so I was thinking, well, what if this was not as closed of a system as
Mm.
Henriques is postulating, but that God is kind of intervening in
Mm.
multiple ways, so that when I feel deficient in my own mental resources, I
Right.
don't just have to go to other people. I could actually receive them directly from
Mm.
what I believe to be a personal God. And likewise in cultural transformations, there's
Mm.
both. So can we have both a top down and a bottom up kind of perspective on this input of energy and information, rather than a closed system? So
Yeah.
that's
Well, for a
what I
Christian,
was
it
thinking.
can't be a closed system.
Right, right.
Can't be a closed system. So what if we try to run the resurrection through this? Where does that?
Well, so would this be a good
I
way
mean,
of
wouldn't
kind
that
of,
be an awesome question to ask him? Okay, where would the resurrection fit within this as a material, as an experience of matter and physics, biology and life? Yeah, where would it fit?
well, so that's an interesting question. So can we use a model like this to kind of think through
Mm.
and deepen our understanding of Christian doctrine? So instead of just saying, well, the resurrection is
Mm.
is vaguely, yeah, what does the resurrection do? Like, so it's the continuance of life, right? Or something like that. It's the promise of
Mm.
life. Well, yes, but it's also kind of the personal integrity, right? There's some
Yeah.
sort of eternal personal integrity. So God takes person serious. The resurrection isn't
Mhm.
just that I get to live forever. It's that there's some sort of I
Yeah.
that is involved that God has invested
Mhm.
himself into. Uh, what does the resurrection mean culturally or for the social sciences? I
Yeah.
guess I hadn't thought about that as much, right? I'm sure other people have.
Yeah. Where is the soul? Or, the
Is there a
Greek
soul?
psyche? Is there a soul? Mind. Where does the mind exist? At a quantum level? How does God materially pull all that we are together into a resurrection, body? I mean, I'm not sure that this answers it, but it gives permission to look at those experiences in scripture and the big theological doctrines, and maybe the dogmas in particular, and run them through these and go, what's taking place there?
What about sin?
Yeah.
How
How does
how
sin work?
how does sin work? Would this help
Mm.
our understanding of a doctrine of sin? I haven't read the book. There's a book called The Emergence of Sin.
Is there?
So, but I haven't read it yet.
See, again, in the closed system here, where's the notion of fallenness in the created order? So the role of human beings. And if we believe the fall, whether it was a literal Adam and Eve or not, but a lapsarian, this is a pre-lapsarian world he has here. But how do human beings in their relationship with God cause all the changes that take place
Mhm.
in here? I mean, the second law of thermodynamics, is that a result of the fall?
Wow, that'd be quite the statement.
I mean,
Uh,
or think about,
Athanasius thought
yeah,
so.
did he? Or the cognitive.
Mhm.
I've just read Practicing the Presence of God, Labash, and it basically is trying to multitask, trying to think about Christ every second while he's doing everything else. And you realize, and that had me thinking the other day, thinking, we can't multitask. We know that now from
Right.
neuroscience. You can't. But what if we were supposed to be able to?
Mhm.
Is that a result of the fall?
Mhm.
Seeing through a glass dimly is more than just we don't know everything. It's the limitations on our cognition, and what would they have been like in a non-lapsarian condition?
Well,
It,
that
it,
yeah,
it
that's
make-
interesting. That
I mean, wouldn't it be cool? If our does our bandwidth, in when we're resurrected, does not just a physical body, but does your cognitive bandwidth increase? And can you multitask in a way that we were meant to? Well done, my good and faithful servant. What does that mean for the universe and existence? Probably going to need significant cognitive upgrades to look after a galaxy, aren't you? As well as a different body, and so all those things are, they're not just postulating. They're all at stake here. I think that most helpfully they're a way to try to understand, or at least try to interrogate some of these things that that we hold dear and true. The resurrection, the soul, eternal life, sin, the fall.
Mhm.
Um, it can be helpful.
That the idea of multitasking, that really had me kind of thinking about, like, like my old rundown computer when I have too many windows open and the
Mm,
RAM is getting used on other windows such that, this recording or something starts to fail or glitch,
yeah.
because you can't multitask because you're using kind of processing power for other activities. And I just think, is a way of thinking about the fall and sin and how we think about brokenness. Um, in a sense, wasted cognitive or spiritual resources that where we're
Mm,
spinning, trying to cover our own nakedness,
yeah.
spiritually, relationally. We're trying
Mm,
to prove our own worth, so we have all these background programs. This is why we go to therapy, right? We have all these
yeah.
background programs that are in conflict with each other,
Yeah.
causing kind of a lowered sense of well-being,
Mm,
accomplishment, purpose, and place, and things like that. Such that, and then you were saying, in a redeemed state, would we be able to fully commune with God, however you think of that, be in union with God, while also pursuing embodied purposes of the kingdom kind of in this world, or would there be no this and other world distinctions, right? We're just kind of a unified spiritual embodied psychological entity in a way that we're not right now.
Yeah, I think so.
I hope so.
I mean, again, what kind of eternity are we looking forward to? You know, the new Jerusalem, a social construction. What's it going to be like, you know, psychologically and relationally with each other? What's biological life? Because we're going to have a continuing biological life and engagement. So, I mean, you know, in some ways we'll find out when we get there, but it's important. And again, I think what we're getting to is what's at stake here. I think you and I would both say within the Christian tradition we're in, and the broad one of most Christians, is that formation in this life, who we become and how we become with the resources that we have and the ones available to us, you know, really do matter for the quality of this life, but also for the life to come after this life, which again is completely missing from this, because there is, you know, death is the end of this for Henriques, but for us it's not. It's a jumping off point into it's a continuation.
Right. Well, and I think long term there is, well, it's hard to know what his vision of the good life would be. From what I've read of him so far, the idea of ethics and morality seems pretty thin. So beyond surviving and thriving, or so, as a biological entity, which is often the case for, you know, evolutionary kind of perspectives. So
yeah, because that. I mean, again, I don't know enough. I'm not expert enough, but it feels like it from my reading of it. It lends itself to it's a materialist account. You know, it's evolutionary. So basically, where is beauty? What purpose does beauty serve? How do we decide what good is? How do we value something? I mean, that's a deeply psychological question anyway. You know, you value something from empirical data and information, but, you know, from experience, from emotion, and then for Christians, what's God's relationship to value, and where is value established? And then that's a huge metaphysical one. Does the universe itself have any value for Henriques in this? I've not read anything at all about intrinsic human value ontologically or in creation in his work. There's nothing.
He would say, to go, let's see, go back to the picture here. He would say, from what I've gathered, he'd say, you know, usually in philosophy and science, there's the fact value distinction. And so he says, oh, yeah, that makes sense that the facts are in the red and the green and the gray, and values are in the blue. And he's like, as long as we understand the levels of domain, we can put values in one place. But really, then these values are just socially constructed values, which don't have any kind of cultural permanence outside, you know. And so at that point, you know, what we call values is just might makes right, or it's what allows us to survive as a people, which is a good thing, right? In an evolutionary view, surviving is the ultimate good and things like that. So that's how he would think about it. But I know for many of us, and certainly in the Christian, but even, you know, it's interesting how activists, even of a more atheistic kind of persuasion, you know, still want to have the trans cultural dignity of humans. And so and
it has to be. And what's it grounded in? I mean, again, his as I understood it, his behavioral complexity process, which again, you know, as a I was going to say as a lay scientist, I mean, I did science at college. You know, yes, we get the genetic. Okay, so that is fundamental to life. Then, you know, when a human being's formed, they have to have a nervous system, the neuronal. And then one of the first things that we learn to do for communication is language. You know, you could see that behavioral complexity. But if you ask the question, why? What value does it have? It's just not in this system. It just is. And I say he's got a helpful bridging between metaphysics and empiricism and the metaphysical. But again, if you're asking a bigger order of question behind that, you know, it's not going to be here.
Well, let's get at the why, or the so what question. You were,
Yeah,
you're interested in this work and other things, this whole organizational systems, leadership, because
yeah.
of the so what. Like, you're not just a researcher, you're a pastor.
Mm,
You lead cohorts of, students so that they could better the lives of their organizations and fulfill the
mm.
purposes of their missions and things like that. So what's the so what for you on some of these ways of looking at things? I could throw the picture back up there too if that'd be helpful, but
Yeah, no, yeah, if you want to. I mean, I'll have a run it and then you join in with me. So came with a couple of thoughts on that today. I mean, I think, again, he does show, and I would agree with him, where we have become captive to enlightenment thinking and the separation of the mind and the body. And
Mhm.
this thinking, along with a whole load of other stuff, is showing that's not it. You can't do that.
Mhm.
Or if you do, we end up with a lot of problems that we have. Again, if anyone who's read James K.A. Smith, when we're not brains on sticks, we are embodied.
Mhm.
All thoughts take place through an embodied existence, and desire, and attention and appetites, and there's all those things going on there. So again, it's a good critique of modernity and enlightenment thinking and the separation of mind and body. That's a great place, because then we can say, where does that manifest itself? Again, pastorally, we're thinking about formation and identity. That our bodies don't matter, even though we know they matter because we use them dispositionally away from our thoughts. It's just intrinsic to Western thinking and thoughts. What I do with my body doesn't really affect, what I think or what I believe. And we know that's not true. That's a lie. Theologically, it's a lie. Philosophically, it's a lie. And within this system, that's a lie. It's just not how life works. I mean, that was one. Do you want to jump in with any thoughts on that?
No, keep going.
Okay.
I like it.
All right. Well, maybe making a move from that, how we can integrate the cognitive with social science for identity information, and the biological. And I just, again, some things that I'm looking at that are in my mind as I'm looking around this. I've come across a thing called heart math. Have you heard of heart math?
No.
I never heard of it till recently. Now, it's a real thing. It's empirically evidenced. It's used by the NHS healthcare system here. You can train in it as a coach, and basically here's the fascinating supposition between mind and body that's taking place here.
What's it called again? Heart
Heart
math? Or
math, yeah. And I've been
okay.
trying it. I've got an app and a little. It uses variable heart rate
Oh, okay.
measurements. Now,
Is
you'll
this like those
again.
electrode?
Yeah, I've got one. You
The
click it on your
tens.
ear,
Yeah,
link
yeah.
up to my phone, and you do meditative exercises,
Okay.
and you can watch your variable heart rate change, your HRV actually change as you meditate.
Okay.
Now, the science of it, apparently the biological science linked up with the neuroscience, is that the heart, as part of your sympathetic nervous system, has a bunch of nerves in it, a whole load of nerves that actually don't just, your heart doesn't just push blood around your body, but it communicates with your brain.
Right.
So the heart really is the center of feeling and emotions. It creates hormonal responses, good ones.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of cortisol, for stress, and adrenaline,
Mm-hmm.
oxytocin, I think, is one of the ones. Again,
And serotonin or something like that.
serotonin in the brain.
Serotonin, right?
But anyway, there is a strong connection between your heart, not for pumping blood, but as part of your body and your mind. So it's interesting the way that you tap into this, and it's really strange. If you get the little device, I've got it, and put your phone on and watch it, you practice meditation exercises, and you practice what they call heart breathing. So you think about where feelings are in your body. So you've got to have an awareness of your feelings cognitively, locate them in your body, and then you imagine where your heart is, and you breathe through your heart different feelings. Again, it's not positive thinking. It's rejoining to positive emotions that you have experienced. So what it does is, again, the basic science as I understand it, it brings your heart and your mind into synchronization with the meditation and the breathing. And you can, with a device, watch your variable heart rate improve. So
interesting.
I'm doing that, okay? Reading Henriques' Heart Math, and it is a thing you can use. Our healthcare system here, if people are struggling with stress or anxiety or depression, it's a practice, and it's an embodied practice. And it's interesting because it's moving away from, well, not moving away from, it's complementary to. I mean, here would be a unified theory you'd probably want to come up with. CBT has been revolutionary for people dealing with the cognitive and their thoughts. But it's interesting how I'm finding that interesting, that therapeutically, a treatment for cognitive disorders is through an embodied breathing practice and meditation. And you're like, that's our world. I mean, centering prayer, Ignatian reflections. What's happening there? And again, I think Henriques he's not answering those questions, but he's opening up the door into understanding how those things work together. So can I give you a very personal example, or do you want to jump in? Because I talked a lot there.
No, go ahead. And then All right,
I've been practicing some Ignatian exercises with a spiritual director. And
whom I'm convinced was integrating all these different levels of
he was totally on everything, because again, now that I'm doing them, and then I'm observing and trying to pull them apart afterwards to see how they work,
and then linking them to all the neurals. Every time I learned something new, I was like, Ignatius already knew this, and he made a practice to get at it. Okay, so what have you been doing?
So I, again, very personally, I've been processing a lot of childhood trauma. I was chronically and severely abused physically and emotionally. Been studying and learning about how my amygdala would have responded, and neural pathways in my brain, and some of the things I've struggled with, anxiety and depression all my life. I understand that cognitively and neuroscientifically. Yeah. But your amygdala can be not reprogrammed, but you can, through meditative exercises, you can re-enter into, and again, these are not Christian practices, but you can re-enter into memories. I mean, EMDR is a type of therapy that some people have done, but you can go back to those places, revisit them, experience them differently, understand them differently, produce different hormonal responses, so your body processes them, and there is a change. Okay, so I'm doing one of these exercises in my imagination, reading scripture, sitting before God, and I feel like, as best as I can, that God says to me, "Can I take you back to this experience that you had?" I went, "Okay," and I lost all sense of practicing an exercise at this point. I just had an experience, whether it was imagined, cognitive, spiritual, biological, I don't know. It just happened to me. And I am watching the moment when my father tells me that he's leaving. And I felt the anxiety in my body that was triggered then. And I felt God leading me through in the reflection and exercise, saying, "Do you remember that?" And he goes, and what did you think in that moment? I remember thinking I wasn't enough. And I had this conversation with God, either imagined or I really don't care at this point, because as far as I'm concerned, it is God. Do you know what I mean? However it's happening.
Yeah, right.
And I feel that the revelation, the understanding was, I just happened to be there. My dad didn't leave because of me. And then fast forward, and I realize how, when I'm in situations where I don't feel I'm enough as a pastor, when people threaten to leave, what does that trigger in me? Anxiety. Where does that anxiety come from? Oh, it comes from there. Right. So in this spiritual exercise, I have come to an awareness of this. I am practicing, breathing and the presence of God in that moment, and seeing him in that situation. And, and when I come out of this and all of this, I'm like, my amygdala, probably what's happening is my amygdala, I'm getting some healing. But what is that healing? My amygdala is being dialed down. it has learned a different response. I have a cognitive understanding I didn't have before. I have an embodied experience I didn't have before. And all of that is spiritual. It's how God works for healing. And all of that in something that some dude 400 years ago came up with. And now we're just discovering with the science and the understanding of neuroscience and the mind and the body. I think we're just discovering these things aren't tricks to do those things better. They're just how we work and how God made us and how he interfaces with us. So that for me is the really exciting bit pastorally. For a lot of people, they just do the exercises. It will happen to them. But I'm the kind of person that likes to know, oh, that's how my brain's getting reprogrammed, or my hormonal levels are changing, or does that make any sense?
Oh, absolutely. And that's where I was talking about the input of energy and information. And so in that spiritual experience,
Yeah.
you're having a different input, which is a different interpretation of the event that God is leading you through and bringing you to a moment, in your memory, which is also a moment in your body, and is inputting different information, is reconfiguring those things. And that is, for us, that's a different level in this tree of knowledge where God is moving from, and we could talk about it, different theological traditions, how, like where, that's your inheritance. You're identifying as a child of God. You are, being filled with the Spirit, right? We have all these different language words for these types of things. But what's been so helpful for me, and that I think just reading this book has made just crystal clear, is that it's really important to understand that God's working on all these different levels, because too often we can kind of dichotomize our experience, and there's certain traditions that are very against psychology, or they're very against these things. And so now I've been okay, but now there's this really good language. Like if you're struggling with depression, like that could be, if I go back to this picture, pastorally, you could have a biological problem. Like you could just have neurotransmitters that are deficient, or you have too many of them, and that there is, a medicine that you need to take to help fix that. And if we're convinced that that's the problem, then, or maybe you need to eat better, or, exercise more, right? So it's a biological question, right? But maybe your kind of maladapted patterns coming from your childhood of abuse or abandonment, your amygdala has been compromised, or it fires too often, or it doesn't fire enough, or you feel threatened when you're not. And so that is kind of a level, in here that, maybe this heart math thing, or maybe CBT, different kind of things, maybe need to change. But maybe on a cultural level, maybe your depression or anxiety is coming from, a different level. And so I think and then there's like spiritual things, right? And so in our care, so we're both vineyard pastors, so in our charismatic tradition, it could just be like, well, you're under oppression, or right. So that'd be one level. It's like, so let's pray the demons away, which, I would do if I felt led, or someone asked me to. I would do it, right? Or the other option is well, you're the hand of God is pointing out your sin, and so that's why if you would stop sinning, then you can, and then but really, like maybe there's all these other factors. And so pastorally, it's able to give me lots of options, and they're not mutually exclusive. And I think sometimes we've fallen into that trap, that these are mutually exclusive, rather than just kind of domains of existence that God has, placed in us, and that, we need to be a little more savvy in navigating them.
And you know what, again, because I want to reach for the theological pastorally, one of the most powerful things for me, and in all those exercises I'm doing, if I said, what was theologically, how would I explain them? I would say I am being remembered. That the Eucharistic understanding, that we're supposed to be in the Eucharist, we are remembered to Christ, rejoined to. Again, I'm thinking of someone like William Kavanagh, Vincent Miller, others here who've articulated that so wonderfully, that what happens in Christ, and that is culturally, sociologically, individually, spiritually, socially, in every way, our worship is supposed to take us away from false embodiments and connections thoughts, and to be consumed. We're consumed by Christ in the Eucharist and incorporated. What does it mean to be in the body of Christ?
Mm-hmm.
You know, some of us think, oh, is that just socially we hang out with each other, or is it a
Right.
spiritual dimension? But what if there is when we're worship? I mean, what happens when we worship cognitively in a room? Thoughts are things.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on in a room when we are worshiping in shared consciousness with one another? What's going along with our psyches and our bodies as we're participating? And it's more than just. And again, this is what you want to reach for theologically. God is mediated through. I mean, sorry. Here's a bigger order of question. Where does God mediated? You know, is he mediated on the golf course with your friends, or does he like to participate himself in the retelling of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
And that affects us at all those levels. That's where my money is, and that's what happens. And that's what we can participate in this life. That's the life that Jesus said that we had in all its fullness. You don't get more full than all these things.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. And that's what, when I was looking at this tree of knowledge, that's what I've been thinking is, well, God's like interacting on all the levels all the time, and we shouldn't expect only one thing.
Yeah.
So like when we talk about the worship experience, which is really big, of course, for vineyard churches and things like that, I know that there's certain traditions where it's like, or certain kind of critiques, especially, very kind of militant secular critique is, well, that's just crowd management. That's just tribal responses. Whatever transcendent feeling you might experience is just group dynamics in a dark room where you're all chanting the same words and things like that. And so you can kind of reduce that. And then I know that's kind of certain burned out kind of charismatics will just say that. They'll just like, well, there was really nothing happening there. There's just that experience that we could name.
But they don't say the same about a football or soccer game. They go there and do the same manufactured experience, but it's somehow authentic.
Well, they might just say, yeah, we're all seeking transcendence, but it's all reducible.
Well, they walk into an Apple store and have a great experience, but realize that someone measures the angle of the laptop and the light and everything. At what point every single thing that you experience in its most authentic self has been curated in some way.
Right.
You got to just decide, is it just all curation and biology, which would lead you back to this cosmology, or would you say, actually, no, there are ways that God made us that we vibrate in harmony with all of these things?
Yes. And that's what I always go back to is you can tell that story of our experience worshiping in one causal framework. And I would just say, well, you're probably right. And then I would just add, but that's not the whole story. Like that's not all that can be said about that experience. So if there's a cognitive problem, bipolar, we could say, well, that's, chemical, or that's, and we could say that's an effect of the fall. And so I always want to tell multiple stories about all the things that we might experience in the world. And so that's why I feel like this tree of knowledge is interesting to kind of work through. And I was thinking, that you and I kind of adopting this just as a way to kind of organize information, is something that Christians have done all along. Is that, John adapted the logos, the Greek kind of understanding, but then he modified it and said, well, actually the logos became flesh, John 1:14, right? So he's adapting and modifying. And I feel like we're kind of doing the same thing. Like, oh, this is an interesting way to kind of update our understanding of these domains of knowledge, but then we probably need to augment it a little bit given our other frame of reference. And so Christians have done this, with Plato, Aristotle, for good or for ill, right? So there's, we could probably fall into a problem in our top level domain adventure, but it's not like we're doing something new or betraying Christian theology by looking at
not in the slightest. And I wanted to sneak the Enneagram in here again.
Oh. Is that you trying to be a 3? It's your 3 wing. So you want to?
I'm a 4-wing 3.
Yeah, you're a wait.
4-wing 3. But if I wasn't so abused as a kid, I think I might have been a 4-wing 5 a lot more.
I probably said this last time, but I launched this podcast, but I'm refusing currently to do Enneagram episodes because everybody's talking about the Enneagram, but my wing 4 wants to be authentically different and differentiate itself from all the other.
You see, my wife is training in it. Her dissertation for a doctorate of ministry is what it is, and integrate it into church. And I just, out of all those things out there, personality tests, psychological profiles, all the big, all those things, there is something about the Enneagram, heart, mind, body, that has an integrated understanding of how all of these things, work. I mean, it is a shorthand a lot of the time that certainly bears truth. I know it. My wife using it, the people she's using it with, and with me. So for me, for an Enneagram, I'm a 4, so I'm a very heart person.
We're both in the heart region. The
heart region, yeah, and I can lean into a 5. The head for academics and thinking, and then but my body. So again, integrating the Enneagram with spiritual formation, which is why these Ignatian exercises of embodied physical reflection have been at first difficult for me, but then so powerful, because I'm using an aspect here of myself, the biological, along with the cognitive, that has this richness to it, that somehow God puts it all together. And Ignatius, again, knew it before the Enneagram.
Oh, I know. His we should just do one of these that's just called Ignatius Was Right. We could do that for a podcast. Maybe I should have you on the podcast again, and we could just say, we should do that. I'll have you on. Let's just do an Ignatius Is Right episode, and we just kind of lay it all out. That'd probably be pretty fun. Maybe I could find a couple other, because my wife just did the whole 9-month Ignatian practices. She just finished it and things like that. So anyways. Oh no, did you freeze? Or did I freeze? Did we lose you, Jason? I think I lost him. Let's see if he comes back. Well, we'll see if he comes back. But maybe I got lost. Maybe my internet froze. We are probably going to take June off. Jason said that we are thinking of doing maybe Maps of Meaning by Jordan Peterson is one of our next big level books. So we'll be doing that soon. Oh yeah, so he's off there. So we'll be sending these things out again. Aha, are you back?
I had no idea. Sunspots or something.
There we go. The sunspots. Well, I was just starting to
your wife had done the 19th annotation by the sounds of it, yeah?
Yeah, she's done it twice now. She loves it.
Oh, that's what I'm doing now, and it is just.
Are you doing it with a spiritual director?
Yes, okay. I am.
Yeah, that's what she did. So, oh, good. Yeah, well, maybe the 3 of us, maybe we'll find someone else to, and we could just talk about how Ignatius is right, because she and I have that conversation all the time. We're just like, oh man, we just learned something. It's like, well, Ignatius, he already had a practice. So,
yeah.
Anyhow, or even the ways that all the exercises are put together and the themes he starts with actually creates an environment in which you can do all the other work. And it's just like, oh, well, he is intuitive.
How did he get to those? I mean, again, if you think because one way is, I imagine, was it just sheer trial and error and doing them again and again and again and again till he figured it, which was optimal? Because that would make sense. That could work around your psyche, your body, your mind, your imagination, the spirituality, everything else. But it just doesn't seem probable, the amount of time it would take to do that. They're so refined. What was the revelatory process that he went on himself and him? But anyway, you're right. It will be
yeah. Well, I think, yeah. Well, maybe we should do that. Well, I was just pitching. I was just saying that we're probably going to skip June, maybe go into July or something. I don't know. And that we maybe do Maps of Meaning. What is your draw to Maps of? Maybe we'll do a little preview. We'll just pretend like we agreed on this. But why are you interested in Maps of Meaning? And what might, if we organize ourselves and try to get a couple other people to read it with us, what would they be getting out of it? Maybe.
Do you know what's very personal for me? Jordan Peterson has just been this astonishing. I mean, I've listened to many of his lectures and just been blown away, just enjoy them as an experience, hearing someone talk for an hour and a half is mind blowing. His integration methodologically between the clinical psychologist and the psychological and the theological, his biblical lectures in Genesis, psychological readings of scripture just started to open up that space of neurotheology, the cognitive and the psychological and faith. And just how we make meaning. And again, for the stuff I get to do with my doctoral students, I talk about making maps to know where we are and a place to stand and a place to navigate. And maps of meaning is a key book from a key thinker in our age of how to understand the world. And then just as a human being, he is compelling. Who he has become and what he does and why he resonates with people. So I finish with an anecdote. I mean, I found myself reaching for, a Jordan Petersonism of find the greatest responsibility you can in the world that just about kills you, because it will switch you on epigenetically, it will switch you on psychologically, and it will activate you spiritually in terms of the logos. And I'm like, that sounds really familiar to me. That sounds like pick up your cross and follow me. So here is this man who is generating meaning at that level in our world and responsibility. So I think his academic work and that's what I want to dig into, beyond the populist level and his teaching and his 12 rules. This, I mean, I've done enough of the reading to see how this really is the work that he did, that he still is drawing on today. It's not like he's updated it and abandoned it. It still is key to understanding his projects and what he's doing.
Cool. Well, good. Well, we'll check that out. I know I've been very interested. I've read his 12 rules. So he's just very, very interesting. So we will, we'll bat that around. Maybe we'll find some dates. We'll figure it out over the summer, but
great.
We'll at least continue our 2-person reading group. See if we can enlist some others. Well, we're technically both on holiday, so we should probably get to it. I might need to mow the lawn, and then I'm supposed to, be with the family and such. So, but thanks for taking your evening. It's my afternoon, so I'm going to probably hit one more cup of coffee. I wouldn't recommend it for you because you're
I'm done now. Done for the day. So, getting too old for that.
Yeah, no kidding. All right. Well, let's see. Actually, one comment just jumped in. So thank you, Jen. I don't know if you've been listening the whole time, but thanks for that.
There she is.
But
Dr. Jen Burnett.
So you know who that is?
She's one of my students.
All right.
Was one of my students.
Welcome, Jen. Thanks for being a part of everything. And we'll keep I'm having fun. So as long as you're having fun, I don't this doesn't have to change the whole world, at least not yet. We'll give it some time. So maybe we can get a hold of Dr. Henriques and see if he can hang out with 2.
Yeah, before he gets really famous. Like, imagine if you could have got Jordan Peterson in a podcast
5 years ago. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see. We both have an abundance of 3-ness on the Enneagram, so maybe we'll aspire to such great heights.
Exactly. We can find a connection.
All right. Well, I'm going to hit the end broadcast, and we'll talk later.